Hey everyone, so today's case is another serial killer case. I haven't done that many serial killer cases on this channel. In fact, the only one I remember doing in recent memory was on the Bear Brook murders, which I just did a couple of months ago. Just like the Bear Brook murders, today's case is a bit convoluted. I've put all the information in the order I think is the easiest to follow, so let's get started. This is the case of Scott Lee Kimball. I couldn't find much information on Scott's early life. He was born in or around 1966. Wikipedia lists his birthday as September 21st, though this is not exactly a reliable source. Scott was born in Boulder, Colorado, and raised in Lafayette. He left Colorado during high school and moved to Montana with his dad. At some point, he was married and had 2 sons, but that marriage ended in divorce. In the early 2000s, Scott and his mom were running a check fraud scam. They ended up stealing over $50,000 from an optometrist who worked in the same building as his mom. I'm not sure what happened to his mom, but Scott did go to prison. Scott was released from prison on December 18, 2002, but not because he'd served his time. He convinced the prison warden, or whoever makes these decisions, I'm not really sure, to let him out early so he could become an FBI informant in a murder-for-hire plot. More on this murder-for-hire plot later. Around this time, Scott began dating a woman named Lori McLeod. The two met at a casino and hit it off pretty quickly. When they met, Lori was worried Scott might be a felon, but he told her he couldn't be because he worked for the FBI. The couple moved in together and were soon joined by Lori's teenage daughter, Casey. Casey Dawn McLeod was the only child of Lori and Rob McLeod. Rob described his daughter as creative, smart, and giggly. He said she could do really well at something if she put her mind to it. Rob and Lori divorced when Casey was 4. In high school, Casey moved to Phoenix, Arizona to live with her aunt after clashes with her mother. After high school, Casey started hanging out with people who were bad influences according to her family and friends and got into drugs. She ended up turning her life around and went to live with Lori and Scott. In August 2003, 19-year-old Casey lived with her mother and Scott Kimball and worked at a local Subway. But things quickly changed when Scott showed Lori drugs he said he'd found in Casey's room. Lori confronted her daughter about this finding, but Casey insisted the drugs weren't hers. Angry, she stormed out of the house. Scott got Casey a hotel room and would sometimes come by to pick her up and take her to work. He told Lori that Casey just needed some time to cool off, and then she'd likely come back home. But just a few days later, Casey's boyfriend, who had been staying with her at the hotel, said she didn't come back one night. She'd also failed to show up for her work shift that day. Her boyfriend thought Scott had picked her up and taken her to work, but Scott said he was on a hunting trip that day. Scott was gone for a week after Casey was last seen. According to Lori, he would frequently be gone for what he claimed was work, so this might not have seemed unusual at the time. When he returned home, he told Lori Casey probably just wanted some time to herself. Lori did try to get the police involved, but they seemed to agree that Casey had left voluntarily and would eventually come back on her own. Lori also claimed police wouldn't let her file a missing persons report because there was no evidence of foul play. Not long after Casey was last seen, Scott suggested to Lori that they take a trip to Las Vegas to get married, which they did. Scott later claimed to find one of Casey's necklaces in the house, and a neighbor claimed he saw her there as well. A few months later, Casey failed to show up at her dad's house for Christmas, where she usually spent the holiday. Both of Casey's parents worried that she'd gotten back into drugs, but thought she would come home when she was ready. In 2004, the newly married Scott and Lori started a cattle farm. Later that year, there was a horrific accident involving Scott's son Justin, who was just 10 at the time. Justin was digging a hole outside, and a cattle grate, which had been leaning against a truck, fell on him. Scott got a severely injured Justin into the car to take him to the hospital, but on the way, the car door came open and Justin fell out. Another source said he actually fell out of the window. Justin was in a coma for a month. When he woke up, he claimed his father had pushed the cattle grate on him. Prosecutor Katarina Booth believes Scott tried to kill his son for insurance money, but ultimately didn't have enough evidence to charge him with a crime. I'm not sure at this point if Lori and the rest of Scott's family knew about Justin's claim or if they just believed this was an accident. After the accident, Scott's 60-year-old uncle Terry Kimball came to stay with the family. Lori didn't care much for Terry and didn't question it when he left the house later that year. After Terry left, Scott told people his uncle had won the lottery and moved to Mexico with a stripper named Ginger. That's what he said. A year later, an email sent from Terry's account claimed he was doing well and had no plans of returning to the U.S. In 2005, Scott was once again investigated for check fraud, this time involving his cattle business. In early 2006, investigators talked to Lori, who said Scott wasn't at home but may have fled to California or Alaska. They also discovered that Casey hadn't been heard from in over 2 years, and that Scott had been one of the last people to see her. A warrant for Scott's arrest was put out, and he was tracked down in Palm Springs, California in March. When he was finally found, a long car chase ensued. The chase ran through the state's famous Coachella Valley and didn't stop until Scott ran out of gas and surrendered. But this was just the tip of the iceberg. An investigation called Operation Snowball soon revealed that Scott Kimball was the last person seen with at least 3 other missing people besides Casey. Leanne Christina Emery was born on March 24, 1978 in Weiser, Idaho, and moved to Denver in 1985. As a child, she loved singing, animals, and the outdoors. According to her father, Howard Emery, if Leanne wanted something done, she'd get it done. He also described his daughter as active and a leader, always wanting to help both people and animals. Leanne made straight A's and loved adventure. Upon reaching adulthood, Leanne started going to school for physical therapy, but switched 2 years in and became a vet tech, getting a job at an animal shelter. Due to health issues her mom faced, Leanne didn't finish college. She ended up losing her job and started hanging out with people who could be described as the wrong crowd, people who did drugs and had been in trouble with the law. She married a man in jail but left him in 2002. By early 2003, 24-year-old Leanne lived in Centennial, Colorado, a suburb of Denver. In January, she told her dad she was going on a spelunking trip to Mexico with her friends, something she'd done many times before. They planned to be gone 1 or 2 weeks. Leanne left for her planned trip on January 16th. A few hours later, she called her sister Michelle and said that if anything happened to her, she wanted Michelle to know she loved her. This was unusual for Leanne, who wasn't one to just tell her family that she loved them out of the blue. 11 days after leaving on her trip, she called her dad and told him she was going to stay in Mexico for a while. But Leanne wasn't calling from Mexico. She was calling from Colorado. Leanne was last seen on January 30th, 2003, checking out of a hotel in Grand Junction. Testimony from a clerk at that hotel later confirmed that she had dyed her hair dark from her usual blonde. Her car was found the next day near Moab, Utah. A sheriff's deputy contacted Leanne's parents to let them know about this. They filed a missing persons report, but it was clear the police thought that she left on her own and that there were no signs of foul play. Leanne's credit cards weren't in the car, so her dad contacted her banks to investigate further. In the weeks before her disappearance, her credit cards had been used to buy gas in Wyoming, Oregon, Nevada, Washington, and Colorado. As far as Howard Emery could tell, his daughter had never been to Mexico like she claimed. One of her cards was used again in California a few days later after she was last seen, but the signature wasn't hers. A few weeks later, Howard Emery got a letter from Leanne's boyfriend, Stephen Hawley, who was in jail at the time. Howard wrote back and told Stephen that Leanne was missing. Stephen told him to contact the FBI because Leanne was in trouble. But when Howard did that, the agent he talked to said Stephen Hawley couldn't be trusted and talking to him would be a waste of time. In the months leading up to her disappearance, Leanne had been writing to one of her cousins about someone she referred to as Hannibal. Whoever this Hannibal person was, she seemed to be scared of him. A few days before she left on her trip, Leanne had told her cousin, "I have to hide my orders come from Hannibal for the moment, and he's a dangerous person." Hannibal was actually a man who had been in jail with Stephen Hawley. The two hatched a plan to escape and for Leanne and Stephen to meet in Mexico. Hannibal asked Stephen for Leanne's contact information so he could arrange this meeting, and the two began corresponding. But he didn't want Leanne to know his real name, so he told her to use the alias Hannibal. Hannibal's real name was Scott Kimball. In October 2007, FBI agent Jonathan Grusing contacted the Emorys looking for Leanne. By this point, pictures of Leanne had been found on Scott Kimball's computer, so police knew she was connected to him in some way, they just didn't know how. Howard Emory told Jonathan Grusing that Leanne had been missing for years at this point. When police found out she was missing, they knew Scott Kimball was probably responsible. Remember, he was released from prison in December 2002, less than 2 months before Leanne went missing. Jonathan Grusing had been looking for Leanne to talk to her about a murder-for-hire plot. This plot involved a woman named Jennifer Markham. Jennifer Lynn Markham was born on June 15, 1977 in Denver, Colorado, but grew up in Springfield, Illinois. Jennifer enjoyed dancing, shopping, and sports, and dreamed of opening up her own coffee and sandwich shop. By 2003, 25-year-old Jennifer was the single mom of a 5-year-old son. She'd been working as a stripper in order to provide for herself and her son, and had worked as a prostitute at some point as well. In the early 2000s, she started dating a man named Stephen Ennis. In 2002, he went to jail on drug charges, where he shared a cell with Scott Kimball. While in jail with Stephen Ennis, Scott Kimball learned about Jennifer and her dream to open a coffee shop. He promised Stephen that when he got out, he would help Jennifer with that dream, but ended up double-crossing them. Scott told the FBI that Stephen and Jennifer had hatched a plan to kill 2 people who were set to testify against Stephen. The case he'd been released from prison to help the FBI with was Jennifer's, though there's no evidence she knew about any of this. Jennifer Markham was last seen on February 17, 2003, near the Denver International Airport. Her car was found at the airport about a month later, but there's no evidence she ever got on a flight. Her last phone call was to Stephen Ennis, who she told she would see in 3 days. Her phone hasn't been used since. Jennifer disappeared about 6 months before Casey McLeod and about 20 miles away. Much like Leanne Emory, police didn't seem too eager to investigate Jennifer's case at first, but Jennifer's father, Bob Markham, kept pushing. An FBI agent he'd been in contact with about the case was able to set up a meeting with an informant who only went by the alias Joe Snitch. Joe told Bob that Jennifer was dead. He knew where her body was and that they needed to find her body so that she could have a proper burial. He even offered to take Bob, as well as Jennifer's mother, Mary Willis, to find the body in the mountains. They declined out of concerns for their own safety. After this meeting, Bob called the original FBI agent and said he thought Joe Snitch killed his daughter. The agent didn't believe him. Joe ended up making an offer to Mary Willis when she contacted him herself. If she wanted to know what had happened to Jennifer, he would demonstrate it on her. Later, he said he would demonstrate it on an escort if Mary hired one. Bob Markham had secretly written down Joe's license plate number and had a police officer friend run the plates, and they found out Joe's real name, Scott Kimball. But Casey, Leanne, and Jennifer weren't the only missing people connected to Scott. Lori McLeod soon realized that nobody had heard from Scott's uncle Terry since he presumably won the lottery and moved to Mexico, so police investigated further. The story, of course, turned out to be fabricated. The Ohio State Lottery, which Scott had claimed Terry had won, had no records of him ever winning. Scott had also sold a lot of Terry's things after his disappearance. He had logged into Terry's email after he disappeared, presumably to write the email that said Terry didn't plan on coming back to the U.S. Terry's blood was also found in a house Scott used to live in. I assume the one Terry stayed with him in 2004. So by now it was around 2008. Scott Kimball was in jail for check fraud and suspected in 4 disappearances. But without bodies, there wasn't a whole lot else that police could do. Investigators pressed him for information, but initially he seemed reluctant to give any. Finally, a few months in, he asked a strange question. What if one of the girls disappeared on federal forest land? Jonathan Grusing remembered a receipt that had been in evidence for a while. It was from a grocery store in Walden, Colorado, near the Route National Forest. It was dated August 24th, 2003, the day after Casey disappeared. Grusing talked to park staff, who said hunters had found a skull in the forest in the fall of 2007. DNA testing was ordered on the skull, which was confirmed to belong to Casey McLeod. It was confirmed by cell phone records that Scott was in the area around the time Casey was last seen. Even worse, he and Lori had honeymooned in the forest just days after Casey went missing. Lori later said she thought Scott took her there so he could, in her words, check out his handiwork. She also believes he staged everything that suggested Casey was still alive. So now investigators knew where Casey McLeod was and that Scott was almost certainly responsible for her death. But what about the other 3 missing people connected to him? A deal was eventually struck. Scott would plead guilty to second-degree murder and get a 28-year sentence if he led police to the bodies of Terry Kimball, Jennifer Markham, and Leanne Emery. At first, investigators felt like Scott was leading them on a wild goose chase, but in March 2009, with his help, they found the skeletonized body of Leanne Emery. She was lying in the fetal position on a remote ledge in Utah's Book Cliffs, near the Colorado border. A bullet fragment found near her body matched a gun Scott owned at the time she died. Howard Emery believes his daughter was killed just after she was last seen. In January of that year, Scott had drawn investigators a map to the remains of his uncle Terry Kimball. In June, when the snow thawed, they found Terry's mummified body in a remote mountain pass in Vail, Colorado, right where Scott had said it would be. Scott attempted to lead investigators to Jennifer Markham's remains, but a search of the area he said she was buried in never led to anything. Her remains have never been found. At first, Scott claimed Stephen Ennis killed her. Later, he changed his story and said one of Stephen's friends killed her and buried her near Rifle, Colorado. He would also later claim he had trouble finding her remains because the area where they were was dark when he'd been there and he'd only been there once. I have seen speculation online that Scott isn't actually involved in Jennifer's disappearance. A Reddit user who goes by Strigoi82 suggested around 2018 that Scott may not have actually killed Jennifer, but falsely confessed to get a better deal. If this is the case, it didn't work. Because he'd failed to fully uphold his end of the deal, his original sentence was increased. In 2009, he pled guilty to second-degree murder and was sentenced to 70 years in prison, where he remains today. He'll be eligible for parole in 2044. So, Scott Lee Kimball is responsible for the murders of Casey McLeod, Leanne Emery, Terry Kimball, and presumably Jennifer Markham. But several people involved in this case, including Rob McLeod, as well as prosecutor Katarina Booth, don't believe he stopped there. The Boulder County District Attorney claims Scott bragged about committing dozens of murders, and his victim count has been estimated to be as high as 25. Let's talk about some other unsolved murders that Scott is thought to be involved in. On October 25, 2004, the body of 26-year-old Katrina Powell was found near a dumpster behind a mall in Westminster, Colorado. She had been strangled and or bludgeoned, different sources said different things, and her hands had been cut off. She had no ID on her, but she was identified pretty quickly by her sister-in-law. Scott Kimball lived close to Westminster at the time of Katrina's murder. He also said at one point that he had killed a prostitute and left her body in someone's backyard. Katrina was a prostitute, and there were houses near the dumpster where she was found. Scott has denied killing her, and he's never been charged in her murder. If you have any information about the murder of Katrina Powell, you can contact the Metro Denver Crime Stoppers at 720-913-7867. Be sure to reference case number 2004-15625. Lena Reyes-Geddes disappeared from Austintown, Ohio on April 8, 1998, at the age of 37. She was supposed to be going to Texas, but it's not clear if she ever got there. She was reported missing by her husband a few weeks later. Another source said he waited 6 months. He was initially a suspect in her disappearance, but died in the early 2000s. Lena's body was found on a highway near Teagaboo, Utah on April 20th, 1998, just days after she was last seen. She had died of a single gunshot wound to the head, and her body had been wrapped in a sleeping bag, plastic bags, duct tape, and a playmat. Her fingers had been cut off, similar to Katrina Powell's hands being cut off, and ties on her body were similar to ties that would be found on Terry Kimball's body over a decade later. But investigators at the time hadn't made any of these connections yet. They didn't even know her name. For 20 years, she was only known as the Maidenwater victim before finally being identified in 2018. Even before she was identified, Scott Kimball was a person of interest in her murder. His son, Justin, the one he allegedly tried to kill years earlier, said he played on a mat similar to the one Lena was found wrapped in around the same time her body was found. Scott has also been suspected in the West Mesa murders, a case I did a full video on a few months ago. I'll try to leave a link up in the cards and down below if you want to check that out. In 2009, a woman walking her dog along Albuquerque, New Mexico's West Mesa stumbled on a human bone. This discovery led to a mass burial pit that contained the remains of 9 women, 2 teenage girls, and 1 unborn child. All of the victims disappeared between 2003 and 2004, the same year Scott Kimball's murders were committed. He also traveled to Albuquerque, sometimes for business. He was arrested in 2006, around the time the murders are thought to have stopped. Scott has also been suspected in the death of a homeless man in Montana, but I couldn't find any more information about that case. Lori McLeod had her marriage to Scott annulled. In addition to planting evidence that Casey was still alive after killing her, she believes he also planted the drugs in Casey's room to get the mother and daughter away from each other. In 2015, Lori was diagnosed with terminal breast cancer. An obituary for Lori McLeod that seems to match her says she died in 2019 in Canada. When Scott was arrested in 2006, he denied his involvement in the then disappearances of any of his victims. He eventually confessed to killing Terry Kimball, but not any of the women. He later said he knew who killed them and helped dispose of their bodies. Then he claimed he did kill them but didn't act alone. In 2011, Scott wrote a 147-page letter to his family admitting responsibility in the murders. Well, sort of. He admitted to killing Casey, but said it was an accident, that she overdosed on drugs and alcohol he gave her. He said he killed Jennifer by causing her to overdose on heroin, and that he shot Leanne while she was trying to escape from him. In my research, I came across investigator after investigator who described Scott in similar terms. Detective Gary Thatcher described him as charming but manipulative, and said he would tell you whatever you wanted to hear. Prosecutor Amy Okubo said he was dangerous, manipulative, and smart. Prosecutor Katarina Booth, who I've mentioned a couple of times, thinks he loves controlling and manipulating people and using them until they've served their purpose. Jonathan Grusing, the FBI agent I talked about earlier, says Scott was intelligent and could read people well, but also earned people's trust only to take advantage of that trust and manipulate them to get his way. Several of these people also describe Scott as a sociopath. I don't know if he's ever been formally diagnosed, but these characteristics are pretty typical of sociopathy, so I wouldn't be surprised if he actually was. Before we go, I want to give a few details about Jennifer Markham's case since her body has never been found. She's believed to be dead by most people I've come across in my research, but hopefully something here can still help in her case. Jennifer Lynn Markham was last seen near the Denver International Airport on February 17, 2003, at the age of 25. The FBI's official website actually says February 16th. She was a white female, about 5 foot 6 inches tall and 115 pounds, with brown hair and blue eyes. At the time of her disappearance, she wore an IUD and had breast implants, both of which could help identify her if her body was found. If she were actually alive today, she would be 43 years old. If you have any information about Jennifer's case, you can contact your local FBI office. I will leave a link below with those numbers. So that's all I have for you today on Scott Lee Kimball. There's still a lot about these murders that we don't know, such as details and even motive. While it's perfectly reasonable to wonder and speculate, and many people have, the person responsible is behind bars, and that's ultimately what matters. Thanks for watching, and I will see you next time.